Okay. Hello. Thank you for
Yep.
participating to the Italian Americans in Ohio Oral History Project. Can you please tell us your name?
My name is Arthur Bruno Petrini.
Good. And where and when are you born?
I was born in October 21st, 1942, in Norwich, Connecticut.
Good. So, how do you define yourself? Just like Italian, Italian American, American Italian, or Italian of American descent, or just American?
I'm mostly American of Italian descent.
Hmm,
I
good.
like to keep the American in front. Okay.
Yeah, because maybe you feel that your identity is better defined by the American, part, but still you want to keep, this memory of the Italian descent, right?
I have a strong background in the Italian, with a strong Italian family, and I don't want to lose that. But I was born in America, served in the American Air Force, so I want to keep American in the forefront.
That's absolutely, that's the feeling of many people. I don't know if you know the actor Danny Aiello. He's one of those who
Yes,
identifies himself as American Italian.
and one of my favorite actors.
So, what do you know about your family name? Are there any stories about this name or their origins?
I don't believe that there are any stories about the origin. I do know that it's my grandfather came over, and the name has not been changed or modified that I know of. Okay,
Hmm.
so I don't know a lot of stories. I just know that it hadn't been modified since I knew about the name. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I ask is that sometimes people, that were called Benedetto, then, for example, Americanize their name in Bennett or something like this. So it happens sometimes that either, at Ellis Island or by personal choice, people decided to make changes to their names. That's
We
why.
had friends. We had friends growing up in Connecticut and Massachusetts who, during the war, changed their names from Ricciardelli to
Mm,
Richard. Okay,
yeah,
because he was a contractor and he didn't want to get. He was losing business.
I see. Yeah, that was the time, when Italy was at war with America, and so it was probably uncomfortable to be, labeled of Italian origin at the time.
It was, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know any stories about your family when they first came to the United States? For example, where they came from, what they were doing before moving?
My grandfather came to the United States in 1902. He was born in the province of Marca in Fano. Okay. There were stories that he was raised in an orphanage. And when we went over there to visit Fano, we found out that isn't necessarily true. So there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not how he started, but there are relatives there who, of course, don't remember that old, but they don't think he was raised in an orphanage. So that's kind of a something I'd like to go back and try to figure out some more.
I see.
My
Uh,
grandmother also came from Fano,
hmm.
but they got married in the United States later on.
So they met in the United States, or they met before and married in the United States?
That's kind of muddy about that little bit of it. I have a feeling that they knew each other in Italy,
Hmm.
and they came over. It was either arranged or he brought her over, and they were married as soon quickly after they got back came to the states.
Good. By the way, I love your fleece, your pullover. Were you in the Air Force?
Yes, 23 and a half years, almost 24 years.
Ooh, very cool. So, if you were born in U.S.,
Yeah.
you know why your family came to the United States back in the day?
As I understand it, um, my family, my grandfather was an anarchist.
Hmm.
And there's a very interesting book called The Anarchists of New London, Connecticut.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And he's mentioned it here many times.
Mm.
And I think Italy was getting a little, uh, shall I say, a little warm for him at that time. I don't know. I think he was fed up with what was going on in Italy at the time.
Hmm.
And so he came to the United States. And then the town of New London, where I was born in Norwich, but raised in New London. That was kind of a little bit of a hotbed of anarchism in the early 10s, 20s, and 30s. Okay. Supposedly, I don't know this for a fact, but Papillon actually came to our house. And so those kinds of things where he kind of got into that kind of a environment.
Hmm.
And his children kind of were in it for a little while, but then they left it during the war and all that stuff. So, but he was in the anarchist movement for about probably 25 years, being in the United States.
I see. So,
So
yeah. So he was probably not necessarily a political exile, but someone who didn't feel comfortable living in Italy because of his political views.
exactly right, exactly.
And have you ever been to Italy?
Yes, we've been one time. We went over. My sister is 6 years older than I am, and my sister and her husband and my wife and I went over. We landed in Florence, and then we drove over to Fano,
Hmm.
and I met my relatives in Fano.
Oh.
They are probably probably third cousins by now,
Hmm.
but they were very warming and very welcoming, and we had a great time. So we loved it. I want to go back. I want to go back. I enjoyed. Then of course we did the tourist thing after that, but we
Yeah.
spent about 3 days in Fano,
Hmm.
and we really enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed my cousins.
Sure. And what was your feeling when you were visiting, Fano, the land of your grandparents?
I greatly adored it, and I loved it. Okay, I don't know. I know you're from Italy, but Fano is a little seaside resort on the Adriatic, and
Yeah.
it's more of an Italian resort than a tourist resort. Okay, a lot of Italians, but they were out. It was early October, but they were out walking the promenades, and it just looked like Italy. I mean, it just looked like what you expected from Italy. I mean, all the mothers and fathers with their children walking. Um, the restaurants were wonderful. The people were friendly. I just couldn't get enough of it. I mean, I could not get enough of it.
Actually, I'm from Italy, so I came in
Yeah,
2007. Yeah,
right.
so
Okay.
I'm from Florence, actually.
From Florence. Okay.
Yeah.
Florence was lovely. I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And so, what traditions? Sorry, just a curiosity.
Sure.
Do your relatives speak English?
One of my relatives does.
Mm.
Okay. He is a booker for one of the United Parcel Service
Hmm.
for heavy stuff on the Mediterranean. So he has to. He speaks about 4 languages. He
That's
speaks French. He speaks Spanish. He speaks English, and his English is very good. I mean, it's. But my other relatives probably speak as much English as I speak Italian. Okay, I can understand Italian better than I can speak it, but we got along very well.
I mean, that's a start. I'm
Yeah,
sure that if you spend some time there, immersed in the culture and people who speak the language, you would catch it up.
I think so too. I think so. I supposedly spoke it when I was a kid when my grandmother lived upstairs from us, and she spoke Italian to me. But
Yeah.
you don't know how much you spoke or what.
Yeah, and Fano is central Italy, so maybe a little bit of a dialect, but it's probably near to the standard language. Well, for example, people coming from up in north or down in the south, they sometimes have a little more trouble, if they came to the United States, because their parents and grandparents spoke mostly dialect, so which is not necessarily intelligible in terms of Italian standard Italian language, so to say.
Well, we were told when my father spoke Marchigiano, okay, which was the dialect. And my uncle, one of my uncles, my namesake, Arturo, used to go over there quite a bit. And I asked, I said to my relatives over there, well, my Uncle Art spoke Italian. And they said, he spoke pretty heavy dialect, okay, So my mother, I think my grandmother and my grandfather spoke a heavy dialect, and they picked that up. Now, my mother, who came from Carrara, she spoke very pure Italian. Her father was educated. They spoke they told me, more Romano, okay? And when she went over there, a lot of people thought she was a native, okay? Because she spoke without an accent. I think she grew up speaking Italian.
I see.
Yeah, so.
And what traditions or costumes have you made an effort to preserve?
Well, at least around Christmas, we do the seven fishes. We do ravioli. We make a cheese bread called crescia. We have quite a few traditions that we try to keep up. I'm involved with the Sons of Italy, and we do the festa every year. You need to come to the festa. It's really fun.
The one in Dayton?
Yeah.
I've been there once. I've been there last year. I've been there last year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It was pretty big. It was amazing. Yeah.
We have it's very big. It's when the good weather's good, it's really huge. But anyway, so we try to keep those traditions going. Yeah. I like to I enjoy Italian music. I enjoy opera. Yeah. So I keep those are things I was raised with. My mother was an opera buff. But so those are kind of the traditions we keep up with.
Good. I remember there was an orchestra playing music and people dancing. It's very neat.
Yes.
Good. So are there any traditions, on the contrary, that you have given up or changed?
I don't believe so. I mean, probably some have gone by the wayside because my father and mother, we didn't carry them on. But I mean, like I don't do it because it's just the two of us. But our family tradition was to have ravioli on Christmas Day, okay? And my sister still makes like 1,200 ravioli at Christmas time, and they have the whole family over, and we go up sometimes, but we don't go to our children. So we go up there and we have ravioli. We do the seven fishes the night before. We have ravioli. Those are kinds of the traditions that I remember. I mean, other traditions, I don't know what other traditions. We weren't a very religious group, so we didn't have the Catholic traditions, if you will. But excuse me.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead. If you want, we can cut this part.
No, it's good. Somebody trying to sell me a warranty on my car.
They always do.
I know. Yes.
Okay. So you told me that you started, learning Italian with Nicoletta. So here in the U.S., in kind of a school-like environment. So what was your motivation? It was a practical motivation, or more like the necessity of reconnecting with your Italian roots?
I think it was more the necessity of reconnecting with my Italian roots and enjoying other Italians and being there with them, and learning of the traditions and going back and remembering things. My mother used to use some Italian terms and stuff like that, and just learning those kinds of things, and it triggered some memories too of getting into the Italian, of hearing things. So those are kinds of things, I mean, I still, and I'm not, the language is probably incorrect. My mother always used to say, when I had to move, she'd say "fooge," and so now I still use the same term. Okay, I mean it's funny, and most
Yeah.
people don't know it's Italian, but they think I just tell them to move. But it's
Yeah.
something that I grew up with, and something that you know,
Yeah.
uh, it's something you still keep and you think about it, and I love it because you know,
Yeah. Yeah, actually, yeah, I think it comes from the verb fuggire, which means to escape or to go out
yes,
from
and I
place.
think that's true. It
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
interesting because we never said salute, we always said salute. Okay, and they shortened it. Okay, and they never say, they always said grazie, but never grazie. You know, so
Yeah.
so it was kind of truncated a little bit, and I think they lost it. I learned a little bit that you it was their language sometimes was Americanized or shortened or something like that.
I see. Yeah, from the point of view of your original family, apart from the anarchist part, do you know if your family, your Italian family was a family of farmers or people who lived in the city, maybe professionals or craftsmen?
Craftsman. My grandfather was a carpenter.
Good.
Okay, and my father took up that trade. And my father's four brothers were all, except for one, were all in the construction trades. So they were all carpenters, builders, masons, and they were all. So my grandfather was a craftsman. He was a carpenter to begin with, and worked for years as a carpenter.
Good.
My grandmother was, interestingly enough, I don't know what she did. I know that when I knew her, she was home. She didn't work. Okay, she raised five boys, but she was illiterate in Italian and in English, but yet she was smart as a whip and knew she could get she knew all the telephone numbers, she knew the bills, she knew all this stuff. But as far as reading and writing, it just wasn't there for her, you know.
Hmm.
Well, growing up in the late 1800s, early 1900s, I'm not sure it was available to her.
Yeah. Well, I remember, the old statistics that at the end, at the turn of the century, between 1800 and 1900, it was probably 80 to 90% of Italian people being illiterate, simply because there were no public schools, and so it was very, very common. My grandparents as well. I mean, my grandfather on my father's side, who was a bricklayer himself, he just knew how to make his signature, and his wife, my grandmother, was completely illiterate, and that were the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s. So
Well, that's true. This is, you can cut this out, but this is a story that this is apocryphal, but it has some truth to it. My grandfather became a United States citizen in the 30s sometime, or the 20s. My grandmother never became a United States citizen because she was illiterate and she couldn't study the tests and stuff like that. But so when World War II started, or it was in the middle of World War II, and four or five sons were in the military, two in the Army and two in the Navy, she decided she wanted to become an American citizen. So she went to Mr. Bevilacqua, who was our attorney at the time, her attorney at the time, and he petitioned the court for her to become an American citizen. I'm not sure exactly how he did it or what he did. The story goes that he went into court and the judge said, the attorney explained to her that she was illiterate and everything, and the judge said, Mrs. Petrini, why do you want to be an American citizen? She answered, I have four boys fighting in the war, and I want to be an American citizen. And supposedly the judge said, well, welcome to the United States, Mrs. Petrini, and granted her citizenship. Now, the story is true. How it unfolded may be a little different, but she got her citizenship in around 1944.
yeah. Yeah, I see. Well, it was not that easy. I think that especially elderly people thought that it was an intimidating process at the time, And maybe we can skip and go ahead a little bit, because I remember that there was kind of, it happened that people who didn't get their citizenship after, Pearl Harbor, after Italy get into war, they were labeled enemy aliens. So
Right,
some of
exactly.
them were stripped of their rights. Did something of that kind happen to your grandmother?
I really don't know. I don't know that part of it. I do know the boys immediately after Pearl Harbor, all except for my father, who couldn't go in because of ulcer problems. They all joined up right after Pearl Harbor, and I think that she just wanted to be an American citizen. So I'm not sure, but I would think you're right. She did not want to be labeled an illegal alien or an alien, an enemy of the state. So she wanted to become an American citizen. So you're probably right. I can't guarantee that, but I would think that that would be a motivation. Yes.
Yeah. And that's probably the reason why they stopped, speaking Italian when they
It
were,
was.
because of course there was a lot of pressure. I remember, the posters. Sometimes I show to my students, because I teach a course on Italian American culture. Sometimes I show to my students the posters, the wartime posters. Don't speak the language of the enemy, and you see,
Right.
German, a Japanese, and an Italian guy.
Right.
And it's like the freedom is not in their vocabulary, etc. So
Yes, exactly. And so those types of things, and that's basically why we didn't speak it at home. I mean, my mother and father used it to their good advantage. At Christmas time, we couldn't understand what they were saying, but they could talk about what the presents were, or if they were mad at us, they could speak in Italian.
yeah, I mean, that's probably why they didn't even probably try to learn Italian to their children, because they didn't want them to be discriminated. They wanted them to be Americans, right?
And I think that's very true. I know that's why we didn't learn at home. I mean, that's was because I was born in 42, and growing up 45, 46, that's when you're going to be able to understand it the most. When you're 4 or 5 years old, you'll pick it up, but they never spoke Italian at home that I remember when I was young.
Yeah, it was probably purposeful, I guess.
Right.
So, do you have family reunions? Uh,
Yes. I'm go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Kutch.
no, no, no. I mean, just go ahead. I mean, do you have them for, regularly for celebrations, or just every once in a while?
Well, we had, when I was growing up, one of my uncles stayed in the military, and he stayed in until 1960. And he would go overseas and come back home. And every time he came back home, we'd have a big family reunion because we'd go see my uncle Nevio. Okay. And he'd stay home for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We'd all get down there and have a big party. And then as the brothers started getting older, and we just lost my last aunt about 2 years ago. She was about 98, I think. She was kind of the matriarch left of the family. So, excuse me. Then we started having cousins reunions. My one cousin, who has a nice house in Waterford, Connecticut, he would host a cousins reunion. We've been to that a couple of times. I don't think we've had one in the last 3 years. I think we'll probably have one next year after COVID is done, because everybody wants to try to get back together again. Because we're getting older now.
Oh yeah.
We're in our 70s, and we're now the matriarchs and patriarchs of the family, but our kids are now more integrated into the country. I mean, my cousin Stephen and I were the first two um, of the Petrinis not to marry Italians. Well, my one uncle married a Polish woman, but I mean, almost all of them married Italians. Okay.
Mhm.
So my cousin Steve and I were the first ones to marry blonde, blue-eyed Americans.
Yeah, I see. So, do you have any special activities that take place during these reunions? Just like, I don't know, playing cards or doing any special tradition that's going on?
Well, if we have one, we'll play bocce.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we'll and as a matter of fact, that's one of the things I do with the Italian club. I
Mm,
belong to the bocce league, and we probably play cards. People will play cards. I mean, everybody played cards.
mm,
When I was growing up, you'd go to the picnics and stuff like that. People played cards. They played a game which nobody plays anymore that I know of. It was matching fingers, like they called it mordula. Okay,
mhm.
you would throw out two fingers and somebody else out throw four fingers, and they'd say, sat, say, and so
Yeah,
and I don't know if they were playing for money or just to get going. And
yeah,
my father played cards all the time. He was a card player. You
good,
know.
good. Yeah, there are some, games that, yeah, there's Scopa, which is very common.
Scopa. I played Scopa with my grandmother.
Yeah, yeah, and Briscola, that kind of card games are very common.
We played Bristola and we played Scopa. As a matter of fact, during the Italian class, we played Scopa again.
Oh,
Okay.
good.
I know that I haven't played them in 50 years, but we played Tresat,
Mm, mm,
Briscola, and
mm.
Scopa. And I played Scopa with my grandmother.
Good.
So I do remember that. You bring back those memories because I do remember that. Okay.
Very good.
Yep.
So, do you have family heirlooms or keepsakes or mementos, something, some objects or pictures or things that are important because they are connected to some important moment?
Well, while you can't see it, my screensaver is a picture of my four uncles and my father.
Uh-huh.
We have a lot of pictures of my grandfather and my grandmother. Um, I have pictures of my grandmother. I don't have any pictures of grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side. For some reason, they didn't take a lot of pictures, and they died earlier.
Mm.
So we do have a lot of pictures. Um, Not so many heirlooms, but different pictures of them growing up and stuff like that. Now, I guess there were some, like I have some of my father's tools and stuff like that, but nothing from the Italian side where I would think of them as heirlooms or something like that.
I see. Can you describe the place where you grew up? You said New London, if I'm not wrong, in
Right.
Connecticut. Was this place, a heavily immigrant area? There were many Italians back in the day.
Yeah, the place I grew up in was heavily Italian. Okay, um, there was my grandfather in the 20s and 30s was the driver of a place called the Italian Dramatic Club. It was an Italian club, not unlike the Sons of Italy, but it was only a single club. So it was an Italian enclave. So it was an Italian club. So all of my aunts and uncles belonged to the club, and their parents belonged to the club. And so I grew up in on Shaw Street in New London, Connecticut, which was heavily Italian. Um, there was an area called Fort Pequot, which was the old Pequot Indian name, and that was a very much of an Italian enclave. Okay, heavily Italian. A lot of the old Italian traditions. We had festas at the club probably once a month, dance or a meal. Um, you know, antipasto, pasta, brojol, all that stuff, and so that was a very heavily Italian influence, and that's what influenced me, I think, more than anything else. My friends were Italian, the Giustinis, and people I grew up with. And then when I was about 10 years old, I moved. Long story short, I had an aunt who lost two children, and my mother went up to be with her, and so we moved to Needham, Massachusetts. Again, a heavy, not immigrant, but a heavy Italian group in the city. So there was a place called the Alley, and the Alley was about 4 or 5 square blocks of pretty much nothing but Italians. You know, the Ricciardellis, the Continellis, the Bacchiocchis, all of these people. So I grew up in that neighborhood also, and we had a little hall down there, a little place where we have festas. And so I grew up around this Italian community. As I went to high school, I got out of it a little bit, but I still love that thought and the feeling of that Italian community. My wife will tell you, uh, I we had a I came home with my wife the first time, or I'm not sure, she might have been my fiance, but we went to the Italian club, and my wife was tiny and white skinned and pale. Boy, all the ladies wanted to kiss her, and how beautiful she was. I can remember him saying that, because she was fair skinned, and we're a bunch of Italians with our olive complexions, and so. But I mean, those two areas where I grew up were just comfortable and warm. You were loved by everybody, and disciplined by everybody.
Yeah, just like a big community, I would say.
Exactly.
Just an extended family.
Right.
It's probably, yeah. For example, there was an enclave of this kind in the 1960s in the United States. It was called Roseto, Pennsylvania. And people, for example, said that they were very relaxed and calm, and they were not afraid of the future because, if you lose your job, you still know that your friend, your neighbors has a cow or something like this. So that kind of, I would say, mutual aid, maybe environment, right?
And I think that was also that way. Pretty much all of the people either worked in construction or worked other places. So if somebody fell on hard times, somebody could always find them a job or something like that, even if it wasn't in the area that they were normally worked in. They could find something for them to do until they could get on their feet. I mean, it was very much that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I loved growing up that way.
Yeah. It was probably tough, especially in constructions. I'm thinking about, for example, the Great Depression. Do you have stories? Do you know any stories about how did they get by during the Great Depression?
Yeah, my mother and father grew up in a little. I go back a little story. My mother was born in 1913. My father was born in 1912. Well, my mother was born in January of 1913. My father was born in July of 1913. Or 12. Anyway, they were both born in Revere, Massachusetts, and they were born in tenements next to each other. So they were babies together. And then my father and his family moved to Connecticut, and they lived in Connecticut to begin with, and they would go to these picnics. And so my mother and father got married. They met again and corresponded and got married. Well, they got married right at the start of the Depression. Okay, so they moved to Massachusetts for a while before they had moved back to Connecticut. And my father they would tell the story of my father had a job, but he had to take the streetcar from Needham to Boston, and he had to carry his tools with him all the time because if he left them at the job, somebody would steal them. And they keep telling the story about they would make tuna fish, with olive oil and vinegar and tuna fish and onions and stuff like that. And every day they'd cut more onions into it. So at the end of the week, they were eating onions, but there wasn't any tuna fish left. And so he was making like $12 a week, and he had to pay car fare and everything else. So that was the Depression mentality they grew up with. And, at my grandfather's house, they tell the story of him having traps in the backyard to catch blackbirds. And they would make the blackbirds and brood, and the kids would go, "Oh no!" And so he kept that tradition going for a long time. So I think they were, my mother and father were very heavily affected by the Depression, and I think, until the war came along, it was still tougher until about 39 or 40. So there were those stories about the Depression. About it's interesting. It's not Italian, but my father and my father-in-law and mother-in-law. My father-in-law was a physician, but when they were getting married, they couldn't tell anybody they were getting married because only one in the family could have a job. She was a nurse, but if he was working, they had to give a job to somebody else who didn't have a husband or a wife working. So it was interesting. So yeah, there were some stories about the Depression. Yeah, they were involved with the Depression. Very true.
Good. And so, did you have the chance to go back to Connecticut in recent years?
I went back to Massachusetts for my 55th high school reunion, and I went back to Connecticut for my cousin's 50th wedding anniversary. And so that was a big, all the cousins were there, and that was kind of like a reunion. And that was probably about 4 years ago.
Mm.
And that was fun. We had a great time. And I stayed with my other cousin. So yeah, we had a good time there, yes.
Good.
So I've been back with the four brothers all settled in Connecticut. I mean, the five brothers all finally wound up settling back in Connecticut.
I see. And speaking about the neighborhood, has the neighborhood changed when you went back? Did you find the same I would say environment, the same sense of community, or something has changed over the years?
No, it changed significantly. It changed significantly. In Connecticut, people from New London have moved out into Niantic, Waterford, the other outlying areas where you get a little bit more land, a little more affluent because they've become more affluent. And Shaw Street has become a kind of a new immigrant neighborhood, different immigrants or African American and immigrant and some of that. Still a comfortable area to drive down, but Montali's Bakery is gone. All of the little places that we used to go are still there, but new houses, different houses. Although the house that I grew up in on 212 Shaw Street is still there.
Hmm.
So everybody's kind of moved. Even my cousins have moved away. The last cousins that were in New London have moved to Waterford. In Connecticut, in Massachusetts, I don't think the alley is as much Italian as it used to be. Although there's still some Italians left in there, it's not like it used to be. And I don't think either. Well, I know the Italian Dramatic Club is still in being, and I have not been there in 20 years. I don't know if the other little social club that we had in the alley is still there or not. But they both have changed significantly.
I see. And did you experience or did you hear of any form of discrimination of Italian Americans?
When I was growing up, I was told about the Nina signs, no Irish need apply or no Italians need apply. Not being able to get a job from being Italian. From my point of view, I don't remember any problems because our high school was not predominantly, but significantly Italian, significantly Irish, significantly Catholic. We had a large Jewish community too, but they all got along very well. And so I think, when I was growing up, and there wasn't any, I can't say now, but I never suffered any discrimination. Okay. My parents, I know, did at times a long time ago,
Yeah. That was probably, first generation, probably
exactly.
the toughest part.
Right.
And Did you get along? I mean, did Italians get along well with Irish? Because in sometimes some places, there were some frictions between the two ethnicities.
I don't think they got along very well until they started to intermarry a little bit. Okay, I, as I understand it, the Italians pretty well stuck to themselves, and the Irish pretty well stuck to themselves. Okay, because the Italians, as I remember it, were the new immigrants. The Irish had been here they came over with the potato famine and all that stuff, and they'd been there maybe a generation or two earlier, or maybe I'm wrong, but they kind of both stuck to each other when they were younger. Now, I know that there was still some friction when I was in high school, and there were some pejorative terms used that I heard that I won't reuse, but there was still some friction going on then.
Maybe the Dago WAP.
Yeah, all of those were used, and my father used some ethnic terms for Jews and Irish and stuff like that, and I can't remember them all, and I don't want to, but still, you heard the Dago, you heard WAP, all that stuff. Yes.
Yeah. And when you grow up, did you feel that your ethnicity, the Italian ethnicity, was, I would say, accurately depicted in the media? Just like I'm thinking about movies or TV shows. I'm thinking about the Untouchables, if you remember,
yeah,
or I don't know, The Godfather, etc. What was the kind of image that the average, I would say, mainstream Americans had about Italians at the time?
Well, I think that the mainstream image they had about the Italians was the wild-haired, wife-beater T-shirt wearing, hairy-armed Italian who sat around eating pasta and in line, and not being refined. But I think that happened basically through the images that were portrayed by the media of whether it was The Sopranos or whether it was there was a program not too long ago about the Italians in New Jersey, and
Oh yeah,
and, it was a caricature of what I grew up with, because I grew up with just normal people, and I mean, yeah, we liked our wine, and my grandfather made his own wine, and we sat around the table and we were loud, but they were all caring individuals, and they were all wonderful people, and it was nothing like was depicted in the Untouchables or in Scarface or whatever you saw, because while there was some of that in New York and Boston, that 90% of the families were just normal people going to work every day, doing what they wanted to do. But I did think that was wrong, because you have to. That's like everybody asks me when I go someplace to a restaurant and there's Italian food there. They say, "What does that mean?" And I said, Italy's a big country, and food is regional there. I said, I haven't heard of all the different types of pasta or all the different types of food.
Yeah.
They think you know it all, because you're Italian, and because I wear it on my sleeve too. So that's another thing.
Yeah, I see. And so, do you think, in your experience growing up, in a sense, surrounded by these stereotypes, was in a certain sense something that bothered you or affected you or not?
I didn't realize it until later in life. Okay, I kind of laughed it off when I was younger, and later in life I got to thinking about it, and I wasn't happy about the way people were depicted. Okay, the Irish guy was always the cop, the Italian guy was always the crook. And I got kind of, as I got older, I didn't do anything about it, but I kind of just raised my hackles a little bit when I saw it sometimes.
Yeah, I see. So, do you think that now Americans in general, mainstream Americans, have a more, I would say, accurate view of Italians or Italian Americans than they did before, or are there still some stereotypes
I
going on?
think there's still some stereotypes, but whether I agree with them or not, we have some people like Antonin Scalia or Justice Alito or some people in government who are Italians, Nancy Pelosi, people like that, who put their best foot forward. I'm not necessarily agree with Alito, but I do believe that those things are taking away some of the stereotype
Mm.
away from Italians. We have become over the years, Fiorello LaGuardia, you've got Andrea Bocelli. There may not be Americans, but they, Luciano Pavarotti. I'm trying to think of others, but people who have become to the forefront. I mean, guys like Frank Bruni, who writes for the New York Times, other people like that, they have put their best foot forward and they have talked about stereotypical things. And so I think because of that, our standing in the country has also come up. And I think some of the programs they've done on the Italians, like, some of the documentaries they've done with the Italians, have raised our standing in the country as to how people feel.
I see. And out of personal curiosity, when you were in Italy, did you had the impression that maybe Italians had a kind of stereotypical view of Americans? Because these things go both ways, and stereotypes mostly come from not being acquainted with a certain group of people or certain ethnicities. So did you have the feeling that Italians themselves have some kind, based on the questions, for example, that they asked, did they have an accurate image of what the United States are, or maybe
I
not?
only had a short stay in Italy,
Hmm.
and I didn't see that.
Hmm.
It may have been behind our backs, but I had to play the ugly American only one time, and that's a short story. We were in a boutique hotel. My sister gets this beautiful room, and I get this room about the size of my desk. And so I said, we're supposed to get luxury rooms, so we finally got changed. But I did not see that in Italy. I saw it more in England when I lived in England for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that was also in the 70s. There was more stereotypical about Americans, not Italians.
Mm-hmm.
But I did not see it when I was in Italy, I guess because we were Italian and made no bones about being Italian and being in love with Italy. Yeah. So I think maybe that helped somewhat.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean, stereotypes in a bad sense, but maybe, since Italians get their image of American people mostly from the media themselves, I know people who still now in Italy who think that America is always like being in New York or like being in California or something like this.
Yes. When I say I lived in Ohio, they go, well, where is Ohio? And I say, it's the middle of the country. And you have to tell them you live more in farmland than anything else. So, it's the old thing. I got an uncle who lives in New York. Do you know him? Yeah. No. And so you're right. There was a little bit of that. When we talk about Ohio, they talk about, well, where is Ohio? So, yeah. But I think mostly it was just that, a lack of knowledge of the country, of the vastness of the country that we live in.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. I mean, there's the media who give certain representation of certain aspects and certain parts of a culture, and then you risk to lose the big picture sometimes.
Right. Oh, I agree with that. Yep.
Yeah. So apart from the big festa in Dayton, do you organize any other your association do organizes any other events or something related to Italian?
They do a big bocce festival every year. Okay, we have a bocce. People come from Pennsylvania, come from New Jersey to play in the bocce classic. We haven't had as big a uh, turnout in the last year because of COVID.
Oh,
But we
yeah.
have a big bocce tournament. We do a lot of charitable stuff, but it's for like leukemia, the Lymphoma Foundation. We put on pasta. We put on a pasta dinner for those types of things. But mostly it's those two things, and we do a lot of working around the lodge, and our biggest get-togethers is our meetings once a month. We have probably 100, 125 people, but we eat afterwards too. So everybody comes not only for the meeting, but they come for the food. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think that probably those two things are the biggest things we do is the Festa and the Bocce Classic are the two biggest things.
I see.
But they do put on fish fries. They do put on different things in the summertime. So there are a number of things that happen.
Very good. So, as I understand, you have children, grandchildren, big family, right?
Yeah.
And what part of your heritage would you like to pass on to them?
I think I'd want to pass on to them, and I think I have passed that on to my son and my daughter-in-law in Las Vegas, is the loving family that the Italians are. That Italians are hugging, they love their children, they love their families, they put family above other things, that they're hardworking, that they're honest. But the biggest thing I think is the loving family and the family unit that has to do with that. I think both my sons have that, but I think my youngest son has it more. Okay, and he likes being Italian. So now see, I've gone from being full-blooded Italian. Both my boys are half Italian, and now their children are a quarter of Italian. But my granddaughter did a couple of projects for school already, and she's only 9 years old. She's going to be 10. She did a couple of projects on Italy. So he's trying to teach her about her Italian background, which is good. And I think that's great. And so we try to teach her that too. So, and he loves his Italian background. He loves the family when he can come up here and see them. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I'd want to pass on for that.
Yeah.
Not just the traditions, but the family unit being that way.
And did they go to Italy already?
They have not been to Italy. I think my youngest son will someday go there. My oldest son, I'm not sure. He's older now, and he just doesn't make enough money to do that. He doesn't do it. But the oldest son will. They want to travel, and I think he will get there. So good. We're going to go back. I think this year. I'm 78, but I want to get back there before I get too old. I would love to take a cruise around Italy and be able to use the ship as a port. But then I want to stay a few more days and go to Fano again. Visit my cousins again.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So thank you so much.
Well, you're quite welcome.
It was great. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure, Danielle. I have really enjoyed it. And, if you ever need to talk to some more, let me know, because I enjoy it, as you can see. But I enjoyed it very much.
Good.